Hey everyone, welcome back to the Bimmer barn. Today we're going to be installing some eBay turbos on my 335i wagon, and these aren't any upgraded turbos, they're just a factory replacement that you can get for under $300, fully rebuilt and balanced as well. I'm hoping that these are going to stack up pretty well against the factory turbos, but we're not going to know until we get them out and compare them side by side. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into the video. So here are the turbos, and you'll see that they're still in the box. They're produced by a company called E&E Turbo overseas. They're not, made in Germany, made by BMW or anything like that, but they do come in at a really good price point as far as budget, and I want to see how these compare. So let's go ahead and unbox them and just take a look at what they look like. So now we've got the turbos unboxed, and they come with these fancy pieces of paper here, which confirms my suspicions that these turbos were produced in China. And now that's not any indication of the quality of these parts, because in China, the industrialization has come a long way in the past couple of decades to the point where manufacturing can keep up with and even do better than in other places of the world. So these turbos could very well be the exact same specification and quality as the factory TD03s that you would get in the BMW. So besides these balancing sheets, which I believe they were VSR balanced according to the eBay seller that I bought these from, and I'll put a link to these down in the description below. They have sold a ton of them and the feedback looks good, so I'd probably recommend these if you're gonna get a set of eBay turbos. But the charts are indeed different. You could have definitely asked a 5-year-old to just draw a squiggly line and I probably would have believed you. There aren't any unit of measurements either, so it's kind of hard to determine. Maybe one of you guys can read these for me and tell me exactly what it means. But we can go ahead and take these away because we're just going to focus on the turbos. Like I said, you do get a oil return gasket and also the sealing ring that goes on the cold side of the compressor to go into the cold side of the turbo, and that's all that it comes with. It does have these fancy little plugs. There's some oil residue on the turbines, and they spin really nicely. There is this little cap here, you want to hold it out of the way to get it to spin, but I don't see any shaft play on these turbos. I don't see anything that would indicate that they were used before, or that these things would have any problems once we install them. So I can't wait to get them on the car, and we're going to compare them to the factory ones to make sure that they fit all the factory specs. But now we've got to go ahead and pull the turbos out from the engine. I've already removed the subframe in the previous episode, so now it should be pretty easy for us to get the water pump and thermostat out of the way and then pull the turbos completely out of the car. We're going to be servicing all the lines and the gaskets as well as these cartridges, and doing this, replacing the full cartridge, is going to save us some time and labor versus rebuilding them like I did in another video. Now, rebuilding them is marginally cheaper, but at the end of the day, you're not going to have a fresh balance on your turbines, and they're most likely going to be covered in carbon like the ones that I did on my old 335i. So this is going to be a really quick swap, hopefully, as long as we don't have any issues with fitment. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get those turbos out. Now here are both of the turbos. We got them out pretty simply, and they do appear to have some good age on them. These look like factory turbos. The housings, these cartridges here, they have a little bit of like marring and also that surface rust, just like the manifolds here. So even though I was told these may have been replaced before on the 335i parts car that we bought, I'm not so sure if they were replaced with new ones. So instead of rebuilding the cartridges like we did last time, we're just going to be replacing them. I also want to show you guys the procedure to test and adjust your wastegates, which which is why I have my vacuum actuator right here. But before we do that, we're gonna rebuild the cartridges because we have to remove the wastegates before we get the cartridges out. So there's just a 10mm nut holding this clamp here, and that is gonna separate the cartridge with the cold side of the turbo from the manifold. But you also need to remove the two 12mm bolts that hold the wastegate to the cold side right here, because that's gonna stay with the manifold like you can see here. So these two 12mm bolts, so that the wastegate stays with the arm here on the little plunger. So let's go ahead now, disassemble these, and then we can compare them to our brand new cartridges. All right, so we've got the turbos completely disassembled now to the point where they're just the same cartridge as what we're gonna be installing. We don't have to go any further than this. It's a little bit of a pain in the ass to get these C-clips off of the cold side though, but once you get the first one, it makes the second one a lot easier. And now we can finally take a look at these cartridges and determine what condition they're in. The first thing I noticed was that the front turbo here appeared to have a leak coming from the oil supply, so it's particularly wet right between the gap where the cold side seals to the compressor and where the oil feed line comes in. And then on the compressor itself, there's like oil residue, you know, this black gunk here. It's like oil and essentially, I guess, dirt just mixing up carbon, and that's the oil leaking through this seal here going into the compressor. So that would probably even tell me that this O-ring right here may not be good, and it's a good thing that we have new ones to install with our new cartridges. The other thing that I noticed is that there appears to be some rusting going on inside these cartridges, and I can't say if this is completely normal, but I would definitely say that these cartridges here, they're a little bit older than they should be. So glad that we're going to be replacing them. All this stuff here is junk. The one thing that does surprise me is that there's not a lot of carbon buildup on the turbines here. So I guess maybe they were cleaned, maybe rebalanced at some point, or maybe just cleaned and thrown back on the car. So what we need to do next is clean up the compressor housings. We don't want them to be too dirty when we reassemble, but let's go ahead and compare them to the new cartridges, and then we can reassemble everything nice and clean and make a final assessment of just how these turbos will compare to these ones once we do get them on the car. Now we've got the turbos assembled with the new cartridges, and they did go together a little bit differently than the factory ones. Specifically on this front turbo here, it was missing the dowel on the cartridge, which aligns it to the housing for the manifold here. So there is a little hole where that dowel should have been, and you can basically line it up where it should be. It only really installs in one position, but we've got our wastegates installed as well. And make sure that when you get the cartridge into the exhaust manifold, that the turbine spins freely, and that ensures that you don't have anything installed at an angle or torqued badly and rubbing up on the turbine, because worst comes to worst, you install it, the turbine doesn't spin, and then you're not going to get boost out of that turbo. So finally, what we're going to do now, guys, is we're going to test and adjust the wastegates on both of these and make sure that we don't get any wastegate rattle in the future, because that's one of those super common N54 problems that you don't want to encounter, and we can actually preventatively fix it. Now, to do this test, you're just going to need a vacuum gauge like the one I have here, and I'll put a link to one down in the description for those of you guys that don't have one yet. And you can do this procedure while the turbos are installed in the car, although it's going to be a lot easier for me to show you guys how this issue comes about by doing it here on the bench. So what we'll do is we'll hook up the vacuum port to our wastegate here. There you go. And once that's on, what we want to do is pump the vacuum gauge until this arm here stops moving. So you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, baby pump, and you see it's not going to go any further than that. And the readout on the gauge is under 10 psi. Well, that's negative vacuum pressure right there, but that's a very healthy number, I would say, for a factory wastegate. And you're also going to want to make sure that this number doesn't just drop on its own, because that would indicate that the diaphragm in here was torn. And yes, my finger is super dirty. But anyways, now that you know that the diaphragm is good and that the adjustment for the vacuum is good, you know that this is completely closed. But we want to make sure that the actual flap in here isn't loose, because what happens is that even though this can be completely closed, the little flap in here might be loose. So this one, when I tap it, we don't have much noise. It is a little bit loose. You can just barely spin the disc. We can go ahead and take the vacuum off and test this one as well. And we're gonna watch the lever right there and give it a couple of pumps. And there we go. So on the last pump there, it was about 10. I could have done a half pump, and I did test this one before, but it came out to around the same, under 10 psi. So this is a healthy wastegate. You can see that it's completely closed on the arm here, so the diaphragm is not leaking. Everything is good there. But what we want to do is test this little plunger. Oh boy, and this one is seriously loose. Let me see if I can show you guys with a light. So here is what it looks like. That's the little plunger, and it's supposed to seal. But unfortunately, the wastegate is pulled back as far as the diaphragm will allow it, but this arm still isn't 100% pressing that plunger onto the manifold of the exhaust right here. So what could happen is, if this gap is large enough, you'll have exhaust gases that, instead of creating turbo boost, they're just going to go through that bypass down your exhaust, and it's not going to spool up your turbo. And then you can get one of those weird turbo boost faults where you don't have a boost leak, it's your turbo that's not producing enough boost. So in order to adjust this now, what we're going to do is we're going to unlock this locking nut here. And I think that there is a little C-clip on the arm of the wastegate here, and we want to move the arm further in so that it's pulled a little bit tighter when the wastegate is at, full position. And then hopefully it'll create a good seal with the manifold here, and we won't have to worry about wastegate rattle in the future. So let me go ahead and try to adjust this a little bit. Hopefully we can get that noise to go away. And there we are, it's adjusted, simple as that. We just moved it up a little bit, and now we don't have any play or movement or noise coming from that wastegate. So we fixed that wastegate rattle for free. Obviously, it's a lot easier for me to show you guys and adjust it when the turbo is off, especially for this one, because this is the front turbo and the wastegate is right up against the block and the manifold. So you don't have a lot of room here. Might be easier to do with the turbos off. Definitely check yours when you're servicing your turbos, but I hope that that gave you some information, and hopefully this saves you a couple dollars knowing that you can replace your turbo cartridges instead of the whole turbo, and you don't have to do a wastegate repair. You can just do a little bit of an adjustment, and you won't have any more of that annoying rattle noise. So that's going to conclude our video for today, and as always, I hope you guys enjoyed watching. I just wanted to share with you guys one of the many options that you have when it comes to replacing the turbos on your N54 motor, whether it's rebuilding them, which is probably the more budget-friendly option, or fully replacing the turbo, which is going to be the more time-favored option. You have plenty of options, and I think that the turbo cartridges, just replacing those, is a great budget-friendly option. You don't have to have a lot of knowledge about doing turbo rebuilds, just have to have like some C-clip pliers. But I hope that you guys learned something about this process, and hopefully that little wastegate trick at the end helped you as well. But if you did enjoy the video, leave a like or a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel if you're new and you haven't yet. As always, I hope everyone has an amazing day, and we'll see you next time.